She hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks, but when a desperate father with frostbitten hands knocked at her door, everything she buried came rushing back. She could have sent them away, she didn't. Laya hadn't spoken to another human in 17 days. Her cabin, surrounded by snow-blanketed pine trees and set at the base of Mount Ashton, had become her sanctuary from the noise and pain of the world. It was a bitter January evening, the kind where the cold seeped into your bones no matter how thick the walls. She was sitting by the fire knitting a scarf she didn't need when it came. A sharp, desperate knock. Her body froze before she even stood up. Fear, old, familiar, prickled her skin. Who would be out here? There were no neighbors for miles, no hikers this time of year. She peeked through the frosted glass. A tall man in a soaked parka stood on her porch cradling a child. His eyes met hers, pleading, exhausted human. She hesitated. Memories clawed at her mind, betrayal, lies, shame. But then she looked again at the child's face, his lips blue, arms trembling. Without thinking, she unbolted the door. "Please," the man said, breath fogging the air. "We just need somewhere warm. Just for a little while." Laya stepped aside. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment she wasn't just opening her door, she was opening her life. Inside the cabin, the strangers stood shivering near the hearth. Laya moved quickly, grabbing thick blankets from the cedar trunk by the wall. She wrapped the boy first. He was small, maybe 8 or 9, with wide brown eyes that darted between her and his father. The man introduced himself as Jonah, and the boy as Micah. Laya noticed the small signs, Jonah's clean fingernails, the faint scent of cologne beneath the wet wool, the way he kept scanning the room as if gauging threats. He was no vagrant. Something didn't add up. Still, she said nothing. Trust wasn't something she gave easily. She handed Jonah a mug of hot tea and crouched beside Micah, who sat silently on a stool near the fire, trying to stop his teeth from chattering. Laya stirred the pot of soup on the stove, her hands moving mechanically while her mind raced. Why was a man like Jonah wandering through a blizzard with a child? And why did he seem so lost? She didn't ask. She simply placed bowls of soup in front of them, her silence offering safety, her small cabin transforming without warning into a refuge, for them, for her, for something bigger she couldn't yet name. The storm outside raged into the night, winds screeching like wild animals through the trees. Inside, the fire cast golden shadows across the room. Laya sat in her armchair, a blanket pulled over her legs, while Jonah rested on the floor beside Micah, who had fallen asleep curled up in a nest of quilts. No one spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the occasional pop of the firewood and the wind groaning against the walls. Laya found herself watching Jonah when he wasn't looking. He was young, mid-30s perhaps, but wearied, as though he carried a burden heavier than the snow on his shoulders. His hands were rough but clean, his boots expensive but scuffed. "I appreciate this," he said finally, voice low. "You didn't have to let us in." "I didn't do it for you," Laya replied before she could stop herself. Then softer, "He looked cold." Jonah smiled faintly, but there was pain behind it. "He's all I've got." Laya turned away, hiding the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew that kind of loneliness. The kind that settles into your chest like ice and stays there unyielding, but somehow tonight it was thawing, just a little. The next morning the world outside was white and blinding. Laya pulled on her boots and stepped out to gather firewood. The air was sharp in her lungs, the silence immense. With each step she felt the past creeping up behind her. It had been nearly a decade since she fled the city, her name plastered in headlines she never deserved. She had trusted the wrong man, trusted him with her nonprofit, her money, her dreams. He'd funneled donations into his own pockets, left her to take the fall. Everyone abandoned her. She still remembered the shame, the public betrayal, the nights of crying alone. So she ran. She built this life with her hands, wood by wood, rule by rule. No visitors, no friends, no risk. But now a boy was asleep in her cabin. A man she barely knew was cooking eggs in her kitchen. And instead of fear, she felt something else. Something terrifying and unfamiliar. The pull of connection. When she returned with the wood, Jonah looked up and said, "We made coffee." She didn't answer. Just poured herself a mug and sat at the table. Her hands were trembling, but not from the cold. Jonah knew he was lying by omission. Every moment he spent in Laya's cabin felt like a weight pressing on his conscience. He wasn't just a lost traveler. He was Jonah Mercer, the reclusive CEO of Novera Biotech, a multi-million-dollar company that had made headlines for breakthroughs in child immunotherapy. The world saw him as a visionary, a widowed genius, a pillar of innovation. But here, in the warmth of this stranger's home, he was just a man trying to keep his son alive and find a sliver of peace. He hadn't planned to end up in the mountains. Their winter getaway was supposed to be a brief trip to help Micah cope with his mother's memory, to show him snow for the first time. Then came the blizzard and the wrong turn and the car that refused to start. Watching Laya with Micah, so cautious yet so gentle, Jonah felt a longing he hadn't expected. There was a calm in her silences, a strength in her restraint. She didn't ask who he was, she didn't press, and that made it harder to lie. But if he told her the truth now, would she push them out into the cold? He wasn't ready to find out. That night the lights flickered, then came the unmistakable silence of a dying generator. Laya moved quickly, grabbing flashlights and candles from a drawer. She knew the storm was still heavy and the temperature would plummet without power. "The generator's outside," she said, her voice tight. "I'll check it. I'll go," Jonah offered, already pulling on his coat. "You've let us stay, let me do this." Laya didn't like people touching her things, but she saw the determination in his eyes, the kind of quiet resolve she couldn't argue with. She handed him the keys and a flashlight. While he worked outside, Laya sat with Micah, who was nervous but trying to stay brave. She lit a candle, handed him a book of puzzles, and smiled when he snuggled closer. "My dad's good at fixing things," Micah said softly. "He used to build forts for me and Mom." Laya's heart squeezed at the mention of his mother. She didn't pry, just nodded and smoothed his hair. When Jonah returned, covered in snow but triumphant, the lights flickered back on. "Just a frozen valve," he said. Laya nodded, and for the first time she said, "Thank you." It wasn't about the generator, not really. That evening, with candles still flickering as backup and the fire glowing warmly, the three of them gathered on the floor with cups of tea and thick blankets. The storm was still whispering outside, but inside the cabin the air felt different, gentler, like the tension had finally released its grip. Micah fell asleep early, curled beside a dog-eared copy of The Wind in the Willows. Jonah stayed awake, sipping tea and looking into the fire. Laya surprised herself by asking, "Do you miss her?" He blinked. "Every day," she nodded. "I lost someone too," she admitted. "Not to death, but it felt the same." Jonah didn't ask who, he didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding in his gaze that made her chest ache. "I used to run a nonprofit," she added after a pause. "Helped at-risk youth, until someone destroyed everything I built." Jonah looked at her with respect. "But you still opened your door to us," Laya shrugged. "Instinct, I guess." "No," Jonah said gently. "Kindness." Their eyes met across the glow of the fire. Something unspoken passed between them, something too new to name, too delicate to touch, but it was real, and it was growing. The blizzard finally relented on the fifth morning. The sun rose over a world encased in glistening white. The snowdrifts were high, but the air was still peaceful. Micah was the first to notice. He pressed his face to the window and gasped, "Can I go outside?" Laya chuckled. "Bundle up first, that snow will eat you alive." Jonah helped his son into thick layers, and soon Micah was bounding through the snow like a puppy unleashed. He flopped into a pile and began shaping a lopsided snowman. Laya stood on the porch, arms crossed, her breath visible in the air. Jonah stood beside her. "He needed this," he said, watching his son laugh for the first time in weeks. "So did I." Laya looked at the boy, then at Jonah. "You're doing something right." "You think?" She nodded. "You kept him alive. That counts for more than you know." Later, she joined Micah in the snow, helping him build crooked arms and mismatched button eyes. Her laughter, so rare, so fragile, floated into the sky. Jonah stood watching, his heart full. For the first time since his wife's death, he didn't feel like a man running from grief. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something new. That night, while Jonah and Micah slept, Laya rummaged through the old trunk beneath her bed. Among forgotten sweaters and faded maps, she found her journal, leather-bound, water-stained, full of sorrow. She hadn't opened it in years. The pages bled with pain. Wounds laid bare in ink, anger, shame, abandonment. There were entries she barely remembered writing, desperate letters to a version of herself she no longer recognized. She turned to the last filled page, then flipped to a blank one. She hesitated, pen hovering. Then she began to write, not about what had happened, but what was happening now. "There is a man in my cabin," she wrote. "A man who carries more pain than he admits, and a child who reminds me of everything I wanted to forget. I should be afraid, but I'm not. I feel alive." Her handwriting was shaky but steadying with each word. Laya didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years she was no longer frozen in the past. The journal, like her life, had space left, space for new beginnings. In the following days, Jonah offered to help around the cabin. At first, Laya declined. This place had been hers and hers alone for so long. She wasn't used to anyone contributing, especially not a man she barely knew. But when she noticed him fixing the crooked hinge on the pantry door without asking, quietly and competently, she didn't stop him. Jonah's background in engineering, before the boardrooms and board members, came to light. He had a way of moving through the space that was respectful, never intrusive. Together, they patched up a leak in the roof, replaced cracked floorboards in the main room, and even reorganized the cluttered pantry. The work became a rhythm between them, cutting, hammering, sharing a meal, resting. With each small repair, the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. Laya caught herself smiling more. Micah danced between them like a tiny comet of joy, bringing snowballs, pine cones, and constant chatter. His presence warmed the coldest corners of the space, and Jonah, he wasn't just fixing her broken home. He was helping restore something deeper, her faith in people, in community, in the idea that maybe her story wasn't over. Maybe, just maybe, it was beginning again. It was a quiet evening when Jonah finally spoke the truth. Micah was asleep, the fire low. Laya was sketching a blueprint for shelves she wanted to build when he cleared his throat. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, voice serious. She looked up, instantly guarded. "I haven't been completely honest with you. My name is Jonah Mercer. I'm not just a single dad. I run a company, Novera Biotech. I'm its CEO." Laya stared at him, her pencil stilled. "You're kidding," she said flatly. He shook his head. "I didn't mean to deceive you. I didn't want to be treated like I was anyone important. Out here I've felt more like myself than I have in years." Her chest tightened. Memories of past betrayal flashed through her like lightning. Another man with secrets, another facade. "Why now?" she asked, voice low. "Because you deserve the truth, and because I don't want to leave without being real with you." There was a long silence. Then slowly she stood and walked to the window. Snowflakes danced outside in the dark. "I don't care what you own," she said finally. "I care that you didn't lie to hurt me." And in that moment forgiveness found its way between them. The next morning Jonah made coffee while Micah snored softly on the couch. Laya sipped from her mug, quiet but calm. The tension from the previous night had shifted into something else. Clarity, perhaps. "I want to start something," Jonah said. "Something new. A community initiative. For single parents. For people recovering from whatever life throws at them." Laya raised an eyebrow. "Your kindness inspired it," he added. "You gave us shelter without knowing who we were. That's the kind of compassion the world needs. And I want you to help lead it." Laya nearly dropped her cup. "Me," she said, startled. "Jonah, I've been in hiding for years. My reputation's ruined." "That's exactly why it should be you. You know what it feels like to lose everything. And to survive anyway." She didn't answer right away. Her heart beat faster. Fear warred with possibility. "You want me to leave all this behind?" she asked softly. "No," Jonah said gently. "I want you to build something from it." For the first time in a long while, Laya didn't say no. She just stared into the fire, imagining a future that didn't scare her. A future where her past didn't define her. A future she could choose. The drive down from Grey Rock Valley was bittersweet. Laya hadn't left the cabin in over 3 years. As Jonah's SUV traced the winding snow-covered roads, she clutched a small notebook filled with ideas. Programs, support groups, resource centers. She had agreed to visit the city temporarily, just to meet his team. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. What if they judged her? What if she wasn't enough? But when she stepped into the glass building downtown, no one looked at her with disdain. Instead, they listened. To her story, to her ideas, and more importantly, to her voice. She met a young mother escaping abuse, a widower struggling with childcare, a teenage girl couch-surfing while finishing school. Each one reminded Laya of the people she once worked with, the people she had loved helping. By the end of the day, something had shifted. Her fear hadn't vanished, but it had lost its grip. That night, back at the hotel with Jonah and Micah, she whispered, "I think I want to stay longer, just for a little while." Jonah smiled. "Take all the time you need," but both of them knew she wasn't just staying temporarily. She was coming back to life. One afternoon, as the three of them sat around the apartment Jonah had rented during the project launch, Micah came over with something behind his back. "I made you something," he said shyly, handing Laya a crumpled piece of paper. It was a drawing, crude, colorful, and perfect. It showed a small wooden cabin surrounded by trees. Standing in front were 3 figures, one tall man, one woman with long brown hair, and a boy holding both their hands. The sky was blue, the snow sparkled. "That's us," Micah said proudly. "And that's our home." Laya stared at it, blinking back tears. Something inside her cracked open, not in a painful way, but in a way that let light through. "No one's ever drawn me before," she whispered. Micah beamed. "Now you'll always be with us, even if we go back to the cabin or somewhere else." Laya hugged him tight, her voice caught in her throat. To a child it was just a picture, but to Laya it was everything. Proof that she belonged, that she mattered, that the cabin hadn't just sheltered strangers, it had planted the seeds of a family, and that maybe, just maybe, she was part of it. A month later, Laya stood at the podium of the community center, her palms damp with nerves. It was Hearthbridge's first public meeting, a small gathering meant to introduce their vision for the outreach initiative. Jonah had arranged everything but left the spotlight to her. He said it had to be her story people heard first. The room was filled with curious faces, single parents, social workers, business owners. and even a few old friends from Laya's past she never thought she'd face again. She gripped the wooden edges of the podium like it was the only solid thing in her life. She took a shaky breath, looked at Jonah and Micah sitting in the front row, and began. "I used to believe kindness was a weakness," she said, "that it left you open to betrayal and loss, and for a long time I let fear keep me silent, but then, one snowy night, I opened my door to a stranger and his son. I didn't know that by letting them in, I was also letting healing begin." She told her story, not all the gritty details, but enough to show her wounds had turned into wisdom. By the end of her speech, the room was silent, reverent, and then came the applause. That spring they returned to the cabin, not just as visitors, but as caretakers of its memory. Jonah and Laya wanted it to remain a symbol of the night that changed everything. They decided to restore it further, not just for themselves, but for others. Volunteers from Hearthbridge joined them in the valley. They built a small guest cabin nearby, stocked it with supplies, and created a rotation system for those needing temporary shelter. Whether escaping storms, literal or emotional, the cabin became a place of reprieve. Micah took pride in giving tours. "This is where I built my first snowman," he'd say, "and over there's the fireplace where we had soup and stories." Laya planted flowers near the porch, wild lavender and alpine roses. She added a small sign by the door that read, "Come in peace. Leave with hope." Each visit brought her deeper into herself, deeper into her new life. No longer a recluse, no longer afraid, she now saw the cabin not as a place of retreat, but as a foundation for everything that had come after. In a world that had once abandoned her, she had helped build a place that would never abandon anyone. 2 years after the storm, on a quiet December evening, Laya and Jonah sat beside the fireplace in the original cabin. Snow fell softly outside. Micah was asleep in the new bunkhouse, dreaming of sleds and hot cocoa. Jonah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "Do you remember what you said when I told you who I really was?" he asked. Laya nodded, smiling. "That I didn't care what you owned." He opened the box. A simple ring gleamed inside, silver, understated, timeless. "Then I hope this means more than anything I could ever own. Will you marry me, Laya?" She didn't cry, not because she didn't feel overwhelmed, but because this wasn't a moment of sadness. It was a moment of peace, of homecoming. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. 1,000 times yes. They didn't need a big ceremony. They didn't need fanfare. They just needed this, a cabin, a fire, a promise, and the knowledge that from broken pieces something whole had grown. In the spring following their engagement, Laya began her garden. Not a symbolic one, a real one. She dug the soil behind the cabin with her own hands, planting carrots, onions, and herbs she remembered from her childhood. The work was hard but soothing. The earth was stubborn, rocky, like her, but with care it softened. Jonah built a greenhouse nearby. Micah painted the wooden garden signs with cheerful colors. They planted fruit trees too, apple, cherry, and plum. It would take years before they'd bear fruit, but they were in no rush. Each seed Laya placed in the ground felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, a part she had buried along with her old life, now rising toward the light. She started inviting others, women from Hearthbridge, volunteers who had lost homes, children who had never seen vegetables grow. She taught them how to plant, how to wait, how to believe. What once was a cabin cloaked in silence had become a place of laughter, roots, and renewal. The garden flourished. So did Laya. The Hearthbridge initiative blossomed beyond anything they expected. What began as a temporary shelter and outreach center turned into a growing network of compassion hubs. Places where the forgotten could be seen again, where parents could get job help, and children found warmth after long nights on cold streets. They hosted annual retreats at the Grey Rock cabin for people navigating transitions. Widows, single parents, recovering addicts, foster youth. The cabin became a symbol of refuge and resilience. Laya spoke at national conferences. She told her story not for praise but to ignite courage in others. Jonah used his connections and resources to keep the project funded, but it was Laya's voice that moved hearts. Micah, now a confident preteen, became the unofficial ambassador of Hearthbridge. His artwork filled the walls of shelters and healing spaces. "You don't need a mansion to be rich," he once told a news crew. "Sometimes you just need someone to care." And it had all started with a knock at a stranger's door. One act of kindness that echoed across lives and generations. The storm had passed, but its legacy was hope. Years passed. The world changed, as it always does, but the cabin remained, a wooden heartbeat nestled in the trees. Laya and Jonah grew older, wiser, and stronger together. They married in a simple ceremony beneath the trees, where Micah stood proudly between them. The blizzard that once brought them together became a story they told often, not one of fear, but of fate, of how a knock in the middle of a storm became the first note in a love song neither of them had dared to hum before. They didn't live perfect lives, no one ever does, but they built something lasting, real. A testament to second chances, to the healing power of trust, and to the transformative magic of compassion. Laia kept her journal, and on the last page she wrote, "A stranger once asked me for warmth, and in giving it I found my own. This is not the story of what I lost. This is the story of what I chose to build instead. And to anyone still wandering through their own winter, this story offers a single message. Don't close the door. You never know what storm might bring your new beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now for more tales of hope, humanity, and healing."